to what degree do you think the SEO community really knows what it's talking about broadly?
Great question. I think it depends. It boils down to the person. Like, for example, if you think about Aleda Solis, who's one of the most prominent SEOs, or Eric Enge, they both know what they are talking about, and they are highly rational, and they can distill information very well and then use that to their client's advantage. And then there's another category who are reading something and then they read more into it for reasons, or they just try to find something that makes them rank quickly, like using PBNs or whatever. So really it depends on the person. In general, I do think that because we have these very prominent SEOs who know what they are talking about, even in Australia, I think in Melbourne, we have Brody, who we know that we can rely on for amplifying the information that comes out of our mouth in a way that is not distorted and is useful. So yeah, it depends, but we are in a good place because we have these big names who know what they are talking about and are rational and can communicate well.
Cool. Excellent. Thank you. My next question is, when you've been on Search of the Record, you've often spoken about how the way Google works could be understood well from understanding information retrieval. And
right.
A lot of people who do SEO don't come from a computer science background. And so they might not really know much about information retrieval. Nonetheless, they come up with lots of concepts how to do SEO, how Google tends to work
right.
and how to do SEO, but they may not have that foundation in computer science. And so my question is, do you think those people may sometimes come up with SEO concepts that are technically inaccurate because they're not as precise as computer science, but still somewhat useful if they implement them?
Yeah, absolutely. Off the top of my head, I wouldn't be able to give examples for this, but information retrieval, I believe, is highly intuitive. So you can come up with ideas easily that can be useful for information retrieval system. People tend to think that Google is a black box, and that's like a small percentage of what we have is a black box that we don't want to share. But the large part of it is just information retrieval system that you can learn about. But like, I know that one of our ranking leads has a class at Stanford teaching information retrieval, and what you hear there is actually what Google is doing. Now, he's not going into details about what are those magic things that we do to enhance the results and to make sure that the results are high quality and relevant for the users, or for the users' queries. But the general idea is there. So yeah, you can intuitively come up with ideas that will help information retrieval systems, not just Google, but any other search engine that is using a standard information retrieval system.
Cool.
It's certainly possible.
Cool. Thanks. Awesome. So today, for example, I'm going to ask you a lot of questions about canonicalization. And would you say that for the most part, these are actually questions about how information retrieval works generally?
I think that part boils down to preserving resources mostly, because some of the things that we have to do to documents is utterly expensive in terms of resources. Like, it uses high or insane amounts of CPU or RAM, and it's just not worth processing them when we already have, for example, a copy of that document or that content. And for that, we have the duplicate clustering canonicalization systems that will reduce the amount of resources that we have to spend on indexing a document. The other part is that generally people don't necessarily want to see the same result from different sites or from on different URLs. And canonicalization helps with that as well. We have more protection for that also in serving. When you see that X number of results omitted, click here. That's actually one of the systems that we have in serving that takes care of duplicates that got through the canonicalization systems. So basically, if the snippet, for example, is pretty much the same, then it might take out some of the results just so people don't see duplicates. So yeah, canonicalization is important for information retrieval, but I think for different reasons than people think. It's mostly for preserving resources and using resources intelligently. Because I don't know what the updated number is, but it used to be that between 65 and 70% of the internet is duplicate. You just don't want that in your index. Because why? If you know that people don't want to see duplicate results, then why would you even try to index them? So you just have to be smart about which one you choose as canonical, and then let people see that.
Yep. Cool. Thanks a lot. I think you mentioned something there that I'm very fascinated by. So when you do a search result, when you do a search and it says X number of results have been omitted, that sounds like that's a secondary layer of duplication removal on top of the basic one. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So basically that's a serving side protection for if something got through our canonicalization process and we would still have duplicates in the results, then that system will try to take them out. It's not as advanced/smart as the canonicalization algorithms. If I remember correctly, it works mostly just on snippets, plus some additional signals to decide which result to keep in the result set. But yeah, you can also override that quite easily.
Very interesting, very cool. One last question about that, I guess, before we move on then.
Sure.
Does that suggest that the serving side filter is more aggressive in some way than the baseline, can I call it, canonicalization system? Because the baseline system didn't catch those duplicates, but the serving side did.
So I would say yes, because that system works with, as far as I know, works with snippets. So we can compare a smaller part of the content versus what the canonicalization system does, which has to compare pretty much the whole, what we call the centerpiece, which is the main content of the page. So yes, it is more aggressive.
Cool. Well, I guess since we're on the topic of canonicalization, maybe I'll just skip ahead to that section of the questions because it's just a natural segue.
It's your interview, so
cool.
you do what you need to do.
Cool. So, okay, just some basic questions. I have tons of questions about this. Now that I think about it, and now that you said it was purpose, probably more than what is necessary for an ordinary SEO to ask. But okay, just basic question to begin with. Does canonicalization occur pre-query or post-query, or is that the right way of thinking about it?
It always happens during indexing. It has nothing to do with queries. Basically, when we receive a document, we break down the document into a series of hashes. And some of those hashes can be used to measure relative distance between two pieces of content. Basically, each will spit out the number that we can compare. Then we might cluster them together if the number is, for example, very close, or if the similarity between the hashes is great. And then we decide which URL to keep as canonical. And then that document is indexed, most likely, meaning that it will end up in our serving data centers as a document that's ready for serving. And then when we are serving, we know that document contains certain terms, for example, and then when someone searches for one of those terms, then we retrieve it. But at that point, we don't particularly care about canonicalization anymore. We will, again, when we show the snippet, but otherwise we are not going to care about it.
Yep. Got it. Yeah. So basically, just to repeat my understanding back, because the internet has so much duplicate content, as you're trying to index it all, you will run hashing algorithms on that content. The hash translates to a unique value that when you compare two hashes, you can actually tell how different they are to each other.
Yeah.
And then if they're very, very similar, you'll enter them into an auction and say, we have to pick which ones actually we select as the canonical, right?
Yeah. One clarification there is that it's not just like, usually it's not just comparing two URLs. I think it's relatively rare that it would be just two URLs. Usually it's up to, I don't know what the number is, something like 20, 30, 40, whatever URLs that end up in a dupe cluster. And then that dupe cluster has its own canonical auction, where they are chipping in with their signals and try to win the auction and then become canonical.
Yep, got it. Cool. So next question related to the treatment of those dupe clusters. So let's say Gary's blog has an article A and Shawn's blog has an article A, and they're exact duplicates of each other, such that they did enter into a canonical auction. And let's say Gary's blog wins the auction, it gets selected as the canonical. If someone then goes to Google and searches for Shawn's blog topic A, can they actually reach through and find that Shawn's article, or has Gary's article literally been selected as the canonical in that case, and Shawn's blog is unreachable?
So from or through the search results, it's not going to be reachable. That URL is not going to be indexed. So the URL that couldn't become canonical will become so-called an alternate name for the one URL that became canonical. We will potentially show the short URL, the green thing or gray or whatever it is nowadays, as pointing to Shawn's blog or the non-canonical one. But eventually the person will, or the user will land on the canonical site. So basically, we are giving hints to people that this is the content that you are looking for, except it's on a different location. I think this is very visible, or more visible, with news agencies like Reuters, AP, AFP, who are basically selling their content. And then if you are looking for something like Reuters something Australia, you might not find the Reuters URL. You might actually find someone who bought the article from them because they had better signals to win the canonical auction. But the short URL, that green thing or gray or whatever, that might actually say Reuters there.
Got it. Understand. So the snippet can actually be a composite snippet. You can have the what you said, the alternate URL as the URL, but the actual content is pulled from the canonical version, like the title and the description, right?
Yes. I mean, we wouldn't even be able to pull the description and the title from the non-canonical one because we don't have those tokens. Tokens, keywords, simplified, but roughly the same. Since we don't index the non-canonical one, we are not going to have a representation of that document in our index, in our serving index. We are just going to have an association between the canonical and the non-canonical, which is the alternate name.
Cool. So extension question then, if I do a Google, like let's say I just want to do a basic test to see if one of my pieces of content is being canonicalized to something else. If I use the site : query for that URL and it appears in a search, that it could still be canonicalized, right? Because what I could be seeing is my URL, but then the document pulled from the canonical.
Yeah. So these special operators like cache and search colon, they are generally not that great for debugging. For example, site : works based on restricts, but that means restricts. I just introduced a new thing. They are signals like country, that piece of content is relevant to language of the content, and also pieces of the URL. Basically, you split up the URL into components, and then that's how you would do retrieval for site : queries. But all that means that we might have a restrict for the non-canonical URL in the representation of the canonical document, which means that when you are doing a site : non-canonical URL, we might still retrieve something.
Right. So in other words, it's not, as you said, not a good test.
Yeah. If you have access to the Search Console profile of that site, then it's much better to do the inspect URL thing, because the inspect URL thing feature, whatever you call it, that actually talks to our indexing systems. Like they have direct connection to the indexing system. That's why it's actually slow, because it has to query the indexing system and dig up a piece of information from among hundreds of billions of documents. And that's why it's slow. But that would be able to tell you if it's canonical or not. I don't know if it gives you any other information about which URL is canonical. I'm not an expert on Search Console, but it definitely can tell you if it's canonical or not.
But
if you want a quick test, then You can just search for the URL itself without sitecolon or anything.
Right. Yep.
Because that will trigger in our query understanding mechanisms something called isURL token, and then it will try to find exactly that URL somewhere in our index. It will still be affected by our ranking algorithms. So for example, if you have a manual action, it might be completely filtered out because you have that kind of manual action, or demoted heavily because that's the kind of manual action that you have, but it should be somewhere there. And then when you click it and you end up on the wrong site, well, there's your answer.
Got it. Yeah. Okay, so that's just a straightforward test to see if you've been if it actually, you can do that, not just you, but anyone. If any URL has been canonicalized to any other URL, just search for A as a naked URL in the search bar and click it. And if you land up on A, then it's not been canonicalized, basically.
Well, it's been canonicalized to itself.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
When we form a dupe cluster, that dupe cluster might have just one URL. Like everything will end up in a dupe cluster in some sense, but a dupe cluster could have just one URL, and then that will be the canonical one.
Got it. Yeah.
Like it's an easy auction.
Yeah.
Like for example, if you have unique content that no one else has on the internet, then we have nothing to canonicalize against. Yeah. So that one URL will become the canonical one.
Yeah. Cool. Very clear. Thank you. Okay, then moving on with more canonical questions.
Sure.
So let's say there are two duplicates of each other, page A and B, they enter into a dupe cluster and a canonical auction takes place. Very simple case, page A has 2 external backlinks, page B has 3 external backlinks, and page B, the one with 3, wins the canonical auction. When it comes to ranking page B, it accrues the value of, this is the question, does it accrue the value of its own 3 backlinks or its own 3 backlinks plus the 2 of A that was canonicalized to it?
So this is, again, one of those it depends things. We have a system called signal forwarding inside the indexer, which will take most of the signals, apply criteria on forwarding, and then it might forward the signals, including links, to the new URL. Here becomes murky from external comms perspective, because here there are a bunch of things that we've seen that were exploited by spammers. So we don't talk about this all that much. Basically, some people were using redirects in a very creative way to take over legit URLs in our results. So I generally don't want to give too much information about signal forwarding. But nowadays, if we trust the signals that we have for A and B, then we might just forward every signal, including the 3 links or plus 2 links, to the canonical one. If we don't trust the way canonicalization happened, for example, then we might not forward anything at all. Yeah, and that trust comes from different places. Like, for example, if you have a rel canonical, for example, or you have an alternate name pointing back to the URL, then it's like, yep, go ahead, because they are referencing each other. So it's good. If you have a 301 redirect or 302 or 30 whatever, we don't particularly care all that much about it. Well, actually, we do. So you have a permanent redirect. A few days ago, we put up a doc about what we consider a permanent redirect. And if you put up a permanent redirect, then we will try to figure out why is that redirect there. So is the content, or used to be the case that the content was utterly similar, for example, or at least mildly similar, and now they are just merging into one place? Or is this the case of buy Viagra in a Canadian casino without prescription, redirecting to some medical information about, I don't know, hair loss, in which case we might not trust that redirect at all.
So if I understand correctly, there's something that you said called signal forwarding, which basically looks at whether you want to forward those signals at all, whether everything's trustworthy, and even sort of implied that some signals might not be passed in certain circumstances, but might also, right?
Yeah. And the other thing is that it gets even murkier because, so every signal has its own owner. basically a team who creates that signal and owns the signal, basically how it's calculated, how it's passed on, if at all. So, for example, when we were dealing with hreflang, then we were the owner of the hreflang signal. And then we made the decision, the conditions to allow the signal to be passed on to a canonical. It might be that whoever owns PageRank nowadays might have different conditions, or some other signal might have completely different conditions. Or there might be a signal that doesn't have conditions at all.
Wow.
Like just pass it on.
Yeah.
So debugging these things, actually signal forwarding is one of the hardest things for us to debug in indexing, because there are just so many signals and so many conditions that can be implemented. And then figuring out which signal did not that's actually not that hard to figure out. And then trying to figure out what was the condition that failed. And that thing, the figuring out which condition failed, you can only do that by looking at the code and then trying to figure out how the condition failed, or what was the signal that made the condition fail.
Got it. Wow, interesting. So just to reiterate back, there are like different signals have different teams within the Google team that design that signal, calculate how it works, how it scores things. And they themselves, because they understand that signal, they also understand dupe clusters and canonicalization. And so they sit and think, should we forward this? Or under what conditions should we forward it or not? And so it sounds like it can be highly customizable for them.
Yeah. I mean, it's basically whatever is available during indexing time, they can tap on it.
Yeah.
Like we have quite literally hundreds of signals in indexing, because we have to use those signals to decide what to index and what not. And they can tap on any of those. Like, for example, if the spam team decided that this URL is super low quality, like it has an insane spam score, for example, then they might decide that I don't want to forward my signal because the spam team said that this is a spam URL. But then the spam team, they might have their own signal that they want to forward to the canonical or not. And then they might use the other team's signal that was using the spam team signal to decide what to forward and what not.
Yep. Okay. Sounds like it can get complicated really quickly then.
Yes. And then each team can have multiple signals. Like, for example, the spam team has, I don't remember the number, but probably dozens of signals that they can forward if they so want to. And each of those signals that they own have different conditions, or might have different conditions.
Right.
So yeah, it gets really hairy.
Yeah, got it. Yeah, great. Oh, thank you. That's a very interesting answer. So the answer to the original question about the backlinks is actually it depends on what the PageRank team is doing now. Right? Basically, that's the answer. Depends on whether they have determined like what conditions they use to forward that, and whether they're doing that now.
Yes, I guess that's the simplest answer. Yeah.
Sure. Cool. Cool. Moving on. All right. So I have a couple of questions about, again, the formation of dupe clusters and how tight and / aggressive Google is in forming those. And so just the next couple of questions might revolve around that. The first is, if two pages, so page A and page B, of their own accord were not going to enter into a dupe cluster, they were different enough that they weren't going to enter into a dupe cluster, but Google discovers that page A has a rel canonical link going to page B. Can that engender a dupe cluster to be formed and then result in a canonical auction?
Yes. So the rel canonical thing plus redirect, they are the trigger for cluster creation.
Sorry, I didn't catch the sentence. You said they basically make clusters form.
So when you are evaluating whether something or two URLs or 20, 40, 50 URLs should be in a dupe cluster, then you are comparing many things at the same time, because we have threading, fortunately. And you are comparing the hashes that might be a clear-cut, yes, cluster these two together or these four together or whatever. But then at the same time, we are also looking at rel canonicals. So if we have a rel canonical from A to B, that will automatically mean that these have to be in a cluster. And then when they are in the cluster, then they will have to start an auction. Well, they have to start bidding in the canonical auction for their own throne place.
Yeah, right. Yeah, to win. Yeah,
to win. Rel canonical is just as much as a trigger for dupe cluster creation as a 301 or hash match or hash similarity.
Got it. Yeah. But then, okay, so this question then applies to 301s and rel canonicals. I mean, there are many instances in which someone could screw this up, and canonical A to B, but A and B are totally different URLs. Do you have systems in place that, or redirect, like someone could redirect A to B, but A and B are very different? And do you have systems in place that would then try to not carry the signals from A to B if they're very different?
So, for the signals, that goes back to the previous answer about signal forwarding. The short answer is yes. Rel canonicals, we are trying to be smart about basically trying to figure out whether we should trust it or not. And most of the time we actually trust them, but sometimes it happens that there is something that throws us off. Like, for example, a completely different content. Here we are lucky because we can still see the content, because with a rel canonical, you're not actually redirecting. But an actual redirect doesn't give you content. It's just a code with a location in the header that says, I'm done with this, just go there.
Yeah.
And there it's much harder. And in the vast majority of the cases, it's a very clear signal that we don't have to index that content. So basically, if we go with the bidding idea, then whoever is being redirected to the redirect target will have a massive bag of coins to put on the table.
Yeah, yeah.
And the redirect source will not have that.
Got it. Okay.
It might still be that it has some signals that helps it outbid the target, but it's unlikely.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think you might have, I don't know if you've mentioned in the past, but part of the signals that might help someone or a URL win a canonical auction is backlinks, right? Whether one has like a lot of authoritativeness from links and the other doesn't. So yeah, I wouldn't probably go down there, but it sounds like if A had tons and tons of backlinks and B had none, and A was redirected to B, I assume the redirect would still be stronger than the backlinks in that auction.
I don't remember the weights of the anymore. I used to work on canonicalization. I remember most of the signals. Like I know that hreflang has like 4 point something, and then 301 redirects had something like 300, and then rel canonical was like 20. So it's like relative to each other, the 301 is very strong.
Yeah.
For something to outbid a 301 redirect, that would be quite hard, but it is possible.
And then in that case, am I right in understanding if A is redirected to B, but A still wins the canonical auction, then in the search result, you might show like A's URL, but then when the user clicks on it, they still go to B anyway because they just get forwarded, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. Cool. Okay. Cool. I'll continue. Thanks for walking down the rabbit hole. Right. So related question then. So you said yes that if two pages were not going to enter into a dupe cluster by themselves, but one has a canonical to the other, it can engender a duplicate cluster. The related question is for SEOs. Let's say you have a client who has just a messy website and a lot of pages that are almost talking about the same thing. And then let's say further that you have very little ability to influence the content on the site, but what you can do is you can put up canonicals. So what if you took, like there are 5 pages that are almost sort of talking about the same thing, and you as the SEO person, you say, well, page C is probably the best we have, and I'm going to put canonical links into the others to go to page C. Might that actually succeed in telling Google to select C?
Yeah. It's actually quite likely. We don't have all that many very strong signals to, like in the vast majority of the cases, especially when it's on the own site, or a single site, rel canonicals can be very successful. And in general, they are very successful. Their weight is high enough that you can see them work well on your site. Unlike temporary redirects, very often you set up the temporary redirect and then months later you still see the old URL in the results, because we are like, we don't know. Like,
how long is temporary? Yeah. Cool. Next question then. I think you've already answered this, but so my question was, if one of my website's pages is being canonicalized to an external URL, will Google Search Console show it? And in our previous...
I don't know.
Yeah. And then, but then the next one is, if not, are there ways I can tell? And I think you've already answered that, which is that, yes, you can just search for that URL and click it and see if you go to the same place. Yeah, cool. Okay. All right, next question. Again, more canonicals. Page A and B are duplicates of each other on separate websites. They enter into a canonical auction. The scores in the auction are very close, neck and neck. But page A has a self-pointing canonical and page B doesn't. Can that self-pointing canonical help win the tiebreaker?
Yes. We actually advise for using self-referencing canonical when you see wobbly URLs in the results.
What's wobbly? Is that when they keep swapping? Like your site has different sites?
Yeah.
Ah, okay.
Yeah. Especially for when you are syndicating your content, it can be quite helpful as well to put up a rel canonical on your site, pointing to yourself to the same URL. It used to be that it helped with hreflang clusters as well. I think we removed that condition, so I don't think it does much, but it can certainly help.
Cool. Super interesting. Okay. All right, cool. So that's a good argument for like a best practice generally. Like if you know that all of the content on your site is unique and valuable, put up self-pointing canonicals around the board, basically.
I wouldn't go as far, because if you have great content, unique content, quality content, then you might not need it. Basically, I would use that as a tool to fix wobbliness in the results.
Yeah.
Like I'm a fan of simple HTML, and whenever you put up a new link tag or meta tag or whatever, you are complicating your HTML. There's no good reason for it. I would always reduce the complexity of my HTML to the bare minimum. I need to present my things as I want them to be presented. And then if I see something not working well, then I would put up link tag or meta tag that I need. Like, for example, I would never, ever think about putting up a meta robot none or whatever, right?
No index,
because,
you mean? Or
index
the follow?
Index.
Yeah, right. Meta robots follow. Index follow, right.
Because it's just stupid, because that's the default action.
Yeah, okay, yeah. So it's just a waste of code. You're sending one more line across the web, right?
Yeah. And also, like, devs sometimes need to inspect the HTML, and then you are like, okay, one more line, one more useless line, one more useless line. Yeah. Oh, look, one more useless line.
Yeah, I got it. Cool. No, thank you. Can I ask you to unpack what do you mean and what happens when there are wobbly URLs? Like, because I've seen this happen many times with my clients that I work with, and I'm just curious, what's actually happening behind the scenes?
I mean, that's literally what you described, that the canonicalization bids are so close to each other that one time one wins, the other time the other wins. And then they just keep wobbling in the results.
Right. And the reason...
I think we call them flipping canonicals or something, but wobbly sounds funnier. So
right. And the reason that they keep changing, is that just because the content on the site might change minor, or like a new signal might come in, and or B, that Google might tweak one signal ever so slightly in some direction? That kind of thing? We don't really do that. We don't really do that here. By this point, the canonicalization algorithm or system is insanely stable. We don't really change much about it at all. Not the weights, not the anything. If we see a systemic problem, then we might change the weights ever so slightly to
help with getting the canonicals that our raters want to see in the results. Otherwise, we would just not touch them. As far as I know, the weights weren't changed for a couple years by now. They are all the same. We also don't introduce new signals. It's extremely rare that we would introduce something new. I remember when we added hreflang to the bidding system, the last modification, signal modification or criterion modification was like 4 years prior. We just don't need more signals. It's working well as it is. We don't need much. One thing about a bidding system is that determining the weights is insanely sensitive. For example, you increase the weight by, let's say, 1 point on hreflang, and that would throw off the whole bidding process and just messes everything up. So what we did was at one point we trained a model that actually gives us the scores that it thinks would work best with the raters. But otherwise, we just don't touch the scores.
Yeah, got it. So two things. When you say trained a model, you meant a machine learning model, right?
Yeah.
And cool. And it sounds like the scoring, like the canonicalization and auction system is very mature as a system. Cool. So basically then what that means is if stuff is wobbling, that's because your site is actually changing in ever so subtle ways.
Most of the time when I saw this, I have a funny story about this. Many years ago, someone was running this live test at a conference where search for this, whatever, then click this result and see what happens. And then by the end, he was like, see, the result came to the first place. And then I was like, oh, that's weird. And then I was looking at the number of links that were coming in to that particular site, and it skyrocketed like
during
in no time.
Right?
Yeah. Because like even if you tell people to not link to it, they will. It's like people are people. Not all of them will listen to you. And it was just that in no time at all, it got a bunch of links plus a freshness boost, because somehow that like we decided that, oh, look, everyone is linking to that URL. That must be very interesting.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah. I think I know which one you're referring to in the conference. Yeah.
And this happens with every site, and it also shows in canonicalization. Like, for example, if some URL receives one extra link that is from a high quality site or high quality URL, then that might boost the bid that it can give in the auction. And then you end up winning the auction at that point in time. But then next time we encounter some URL in that cluster and we recalculate the bids, then the other URL B might acquire 3 links that are all from high quality site. So B wins at that point.
Yeah.
And depending the size of the cluster and the relative importance of the URLs on the internet, the bidding happens every hour, for example. And because we have an incremental index that's reflected almost an instant on the serving index. So you see the URL wobble between A and B because we just recalculated who the canonical should be.
Got it. Yeah. I think my question about wobbling is slightly different though. Because sometimes when I look at sites that have URLs that are wobbling, they're not actually exact duplicates of each other. They're just like, let's say a simple case, right? Let's say my website is about IT services in Sydney, and I'm just not a great architect of websites. I don't design lots of distinct pages. And so I have like 10 pages on my site, all talking about how I do IT services in Sydney in one way or another. But they're not exact duplicates. They're not word for word duplicates, right? Then someone searches for IT services Sydney, and on day 1 it's page A, but on day 2 it's page C. Are those actually entering canonical auctions with each other if their content is very similar but not duplicated?
I mean, depends on the similarity between the content. I mean, if it's your own site, then you can test in Search Console whether they are duplicates. So that would be the first thing that I do. And then if they are duplicates, then it has to boil down to content if you don't have rel canonical and redirects. And then you can tweak the content so they don't become redirects. Yeah. They don't become clustered together. Yeah. Basically, you're actually improving people's lives with it because
Yeah, it's not a great UX to read that website
Yeah.
anyway. Yeah. No, yeah, cool. Okay, cool. Thank you. I think that's it for canonicalization. I guess I have maybe one final question, which is,
Okay.
so you mentioned that canonicalization is quite mature, and so Google has a really good understanding of when and where it wants to create a dupe cluster. And there must be, and that has, you've mentioned, something to do with the distance of the hashes between the individual documents within the dupe cluster, right?
One of the things.
One of the things, right? So the actual tightness or looseness of that distance, aka how far the distance is in the hash, how did Google come up with the exact fine tuning of that? Because I can see that the internet it contains a lot of duplication, but things are not precisely duplicate with each other, right? Does that make sense?
I mean, we had this SIMHASH algorithm for 20 years, I want to say, 21 years. In the beginning, it was not all that great. Basically, it was clustering everything and my grandmother together. But eventually, we tweaked it enough that now it's giving us something that we can actually work with and basically blindly trust. So it was really just looking at the results and deciding whether the results make sense or not. The results of the SIM hashing algorithm.
Yep.
And then tweaking it and tweaking it and tweaking it for 20 years.
Right. So it's basically, would the quality raters be involved in that? Like you explain to them how duplication works and then they help to identify whether these should be clustered?
Yes. We looked at the SIM hashing thing. Like some of these things happen internally, especially in the earlier days, where we were relying on raters when it came to search results. But nowadays we can use them for more things.
Got it.
So in the beginning, for example, with hreflang, we sat down with back then my tech lead, and we were going through the results that the indexing system generated, and we were trying to make an educated decision whether some weights that we set were okay or not. For example, an Austrian and the Swiss page were not clustering together, then we would try to adjust something in hreflang to help that cluster come together, and then run the experiment again. And then us looking at the results and trying to decide whether the results make sense and tweak again if they didn't, until they spat out something that looked okay. Nowadays, I could ask raters to do that for us.
Got it. Yeah. Cool. Very, very interesting. Thank you. Thanks for the interesting insights into like how things evolve internally. Okay, cool. So I think I'm finally done with canonicalization. Next topic, UX and UI design. So when you came and visited last time in Sydney, we had a conversation, and one of the things I asked you was, does Google use design as part of its understanding of pages and ranking of pages? And so I guess the first question is, what would the answer be to that?
The short answer is yes. We do care a lot about the design and especially content placement. Nowadays, web pages can be layered, as in you could have, for example, the actual page where the content is. On top of that, you might have a modal dialog for subscribe to newsletter. And on top of that, you might have another consent dialog for cookies or whatnot. And we started also looking at the z-axis, so what's in the foreground. So basically, if you are hiding your content with some modal dialogue, and I don't mean legal interstitials like confirm your age or crap like that, but if you are pushing your content further down on the z-axis, then we might assign lower weight to those tokens, to those keywords. We are trying to be smart about it, but if you start putting content that is irrelevant to the most visible part, then you are telling search engines in general that, hey, look at this, because this is the most important thing. And it might be just your stupid newsletter begging users to sign up. Again, like with legal interstitials, that's different. And then also on the XY axis, you might have something very down on the x-axis, on the vertical axis, which means that it's somewhere in the footer. You think it's not that important. Links are devalued there. Content is devalued there. But then you have the tight space, the centerpiece, the main content that we can see, and we can say that, okay, that's the beefy part of the content that should carry the most weight.
Got it.
But again, you can throw us off with your stupid newsletter sign up form because you put it on the z-axis and you say that, oh, this is the most important thing.
Yeah, got it. Okay, cool. That makes a lot of sense. It sounds like most of the effort, correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like most of the effort that you've described there in terms of how you use design is to detect where the core content is and to consider it or prioritize it based on how well it's placed. And it's really a UX thing. It's very much a UX experience driven.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
And
I mean, the same can go for those idiotic hero images, right? Like on the first screen, all I will see is that child licking an ice cream instead of reading about my hair loss problem. Like, why?
Yeah.
Like you are pushing the content further down on the page to show an completely unrelated image.
Got it. So that is a good segue to my second question, which is related to this. Let's say 3 pages are competing for a query, and they're not duplicated. They're just generally competing. And on website A, there's a nice thin menu, and the content begins pretty much immediately above the fold. And website B has like a really thick menu that covers half the fold. And the website C has a burger menu, for example. If there's a tiebreaker scenario, would something like the thin menu be preferenced or the burger menu?
No, we wouldn't care about that. Usually those, or menus in general, regardless if they are burger or not, or hot dog, they are generally just ignored. They are, like, from ranking perspective, they are quite useless. For discovery, they can be very useful, but from ranking perspective, they are just completely useless.
Got it. Cool, great. Next question. You've talked a lot about what I would call the UX design, or like the wireframe of the site, boilerplates, core content. But thinking about UI design, so like how people design elements, make color choices, or those kinds of things. Would I be right in saying Google is pretty much neutral to those elements? Or is there any degree to which you might actually look at the UI design?
I think we are neutral, but if we notice that people are less excited about your site than they used to be, that might be reflected in your site search results. For example, if people keep talking about you because your IT services are the best in Sydney, and Twitter is full of it, Instagram is full of it because you also give out cookies, and everyone is happy with your, okay, I shouldn't use happy because not sentiment happy, but as in like they are cheering for you because you have a great site.
Yeah.
And parentheses, we don't use sentiment analysis in ranking results before someone goes there. And if they get annoyed with your site and they start talking less and less about your site, that will be in some sense reflected in your site search results. You might start ranking lower because other sites are taking over your positions, because maybe those are, or that's the site, or that your competitor is the one who people are talking about now because they are doing something better. And that might be that they have less annoying menus, for example, on their site, or they don't have so many modal dialogues that are jumping in your face. And or if you have a recipe site, maybe they don't have long descriptions about how this recipe came to life when Adam and Eve were eating the forbidden fruit.
Yeah, got it. Cool, thank you. That's a great answer. So in short, it's primarily indirect. Like, if you launch a new website, you had a great old website, people were linking to it, people were talking about it, you launch a new website, and most of everything's the same, but the design is really bad and the experience is bad, and so people are not as excited or buzzing about it anymore. That's an indirect effect, basically.
Buzzing, that's a good word, yes.
Okay, cool. That's it for UX UI design questions. Next question, so just some technical SEO questions. In the SEO world, many individuals will speak about this concept of crawl budget. Basic question is like, to what extent is this an accurate idea?
So we put up quite a large blog post about what we think crawl budget is, which is a combination of crawl demand and crawl capacity. So if they are talking about that kind of crawl budget, then it is accurate. There are misconceptions about it, but it's so much better than it was like 5 years ago or before we put up that blog post. Now it seems that people are actually having a good idea about crawl budget. It's generally accurate.
Cool. Got it.
At least nowadays.
Yeah. Cool. Next question. So a site has a large number of parameterized URLs that the webmaster knows don't add value to Google's index if Google has them there. Would it save crawl budget to go to robots.txt and block out parameters?
So I would probably use robots.txt for that purpose. It is a very good mechanism for that. But I also have to be aware that some of those URLs might get still indexed if people are linking to those URLs.
Yeah.
Because that shows that those URLs are important. In which case, I might actually unrobot them. Just that one URL. Like basically, I would add a negation to the disallow. Yeah, I would use it. It's a fantastic way to control robots in general.
Cool, great. Next question. So, how are robots.txt and meta robots no index treated differently by Google, if at all?
Oh, they are like completely different.
Okay.
Wait, meta robots no index or robots text disallow?
Yes, correct. Yeah. Sorry, good clarification. So robots.txt disallowing a URL or a folder, and or using meta robots no index.
Completely different. So we have. Let's start with no index. No index literally tells us do not index this page. We honor it every time, all the time, no questions asked. For that, we need to be able to crawl that page and see the HTML. If we can't do that, because, for example, a disallow rule is in place that is affecting that URL that we wanted to crawl, then we might decide to index it or not. But we are certainly not going to crawl it with Googlebot. There are other bots that Google uses that might still crawl it for other purposes. Like, for example, if you have a rule for user agent star disallow folder, AdSense bot or one of the AdSense bots might still crawl it because that bot requires an explicit user agent name, like where you tell it that this is the user agent that I don't want this URL path to crawl. So yeah, we have to be able to crawl the URL to see the no index. With a disallow, we wouldn't be able to do it. With a disallow, all you are saying is that don't crawl this URL. That's all. Nothing else. We are not going to crawl that URL with Googlebot because you told us not to. But if there are enough people linking to that URL, we might index that URL, not the content, and show it in the results as a URL, plus a little snippet saying that the snippet is unavailable or whatever.
There's something like this site's description is unavailable due to its robots.txt. Something like that, right?
Yeah, something like that. So common misconception about the disallow or indexing disallowed URLs is that it happens a lot. That's not true. It's a sub 0.1% of the URLs in our index is roboted URLs, and they are typically very important URLs on the site, on the internet, in some sense.
Yeah.
Yes, it might happen that your IT services URL gets indexed, but I'm fairly certain it gets dropped very fast if you disallow it. Another thing that we don't talk about is indexing quotas. Roboted URLs have a very tiny quota. We can only ever index a small number of URLs compared to the whole index.
Right, so just so I can repeat back if I understand it correctly. So if you use robots.txt, if you use a disallow statement, that will almost all the time prevent Google from attempting to crawl those pages in the first instance.
Correction. So Googlebot will never crawl that URL.
Right.
Googlebot will just not. There are other robots, Google robots, that might crawl it because you were not explicit enough or because the request was triggered by user request. But Googlebot will never crawl that URL.
Okay. But then the meta robots no index presumes that Google has to crawl that URL in order to see the no index in the first instance because it's on the page. At which point, I assume you said honor it in every case. So it'll crawl this page, it'll see the no index, and then it'll drop it. In that order.
Correct.
Kind of thing, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So if your goal is to conserve crawl budget, it sounds like the most efficient way is to use robots.txt disallows.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, from the perspective of keeping stuff out of the index is actually very efficient. Plus, it conserves scroll budget. Another side topic is that I don't want this URL to be crawled or indexed because it's private URL. Like we have private information there. It's like you are thinking about this in a stupid way. Like if it's private information, then you shouldn't put it in the robots.txt or allow anyone but authorized users to access that information. If we can access it, you have a completely different kind of problem.
Yeah, no, I got it. I think we discussed this briefly last time. You should either 403 it to Googlebot, like forbidden, I think that is, or just HTTP authentication.
Just make sure that it's not accessible to unauthorized people or bots.
Perfect. Cool. Then final technical SEO question. So I asked this a couple of years ago, actually, when you visited Sydney. So let's say I'm on Google Search Console and I see that Google is making many requests to my website, but when I actually look at the SERP results and I click cached, I see that the index might be weeks old. So like Google is accessing my site daily, many times a day, but the cache is old. What explains that discrepancy?
The simple explanation is that the cache, that's a different index. Basically, we crawl our own index in some sense, and then we render the document and then put it up. Not render. You use whatever we fetched and then put it up in our cache index. That's a slow process, essentially building a completely different index. That's the basic explanation. Side note there is that just because we access the URL, that doesn't mean that we are going to index it. We might access a URL just to check headers, for example, like is it returning a 304 not modified or something like that, or just checking the content, generating a hash, and then comparing to what we had last time, and then we are not reprocessing the whole page if, for example, the change was minimal or in the wrong place, boilerplate.
Footer, for example. Right. Or
yeah.
Header. Yeah, got it. No. So I have some questions about keyword expansion. So in your recent search off the record, you spent some time talking about how keyword expansion works. That let's say you put in, my example is car hire Sydney as a keyword. Then expansion will happen where you might match certain of those words to similar words. For example, hire would probably be expanded to rent or rental, like car rental Sydney, car hire Sydney. Or you mentioned auto, right? Car and auto, for example, could be expanded. Basically, in short, is it correct to say that car hire Sydney, car rental Sydney, because they're so similar that the results would be almost identical because of that expansion mechanism, but that there might still be subtle differences depending on the precise words that were used?
Yes. So whenever we expand query, the expansion will have different weight. You will start with the original term, which is car hire Sydney.
Yeah.
That will have a weight of 1. And then car rental Sydney will have, I'm making a number up, 0.95.
Yeah.
Because they are utterly close, but they are not the same. And you looked for hire, not for rental, for your own reasons. We don't know why. And then as we get farther away with the expansions, the lower the weight will be. I don't have more words for hire, so I don't know how to
hiring, more. I guess, but that's a variant, right?
Yeah, that's just a variant that will be probably meshed together with hire. Well, actually, no. That will also have a lower weight because every expansion will have a lower weight.
Right. Yeah.
But anyway, so the farther away you get in the synonym structure from higher, the less weight the expansion will have. And then that weight is used to calculate the topicality, the relevancy of the results when we are doing the initial scoring and the retrieval.
Yeah.
So if you flip it around, then it will be different, probably very subtly different, because the weights will change. Like basically, rental will have the complete weight, the 1 versus higher.
Got it. Yeah. No, cool. Very random digression on that. when you are looking at the synonyms, do you use some kind of vector? This is more of a mathematical question, linguistic question. Like, do you use some kind of way of computing the distance between synonyms?
Yes. If you want to read about that, then the Google Translate team has amazing white papers. And I think Jeff Dean has an interview with The Verge, I want to say, about Google Translate and how they were training their models. And it's very similar to what we were doing or what we are doing in Search too.
Cool. Okay, cool. Next question then about keyword expansion, but more so about keywords and intent. So I know this is like in essence asking about how the magic works, but how does Google assess, for instance, e-commerce intent? So like if someone Googles women's shoes, it's likely that some e-commerce category pages with women's shoes would rank highly, but they might have very little text on the page. Whereas someone else might write a blog article about women's shoes that has lots of text, ostensibly lots of content, but would probably rank lower for certain keywords. So how do you figure out that intent?
I'm not going to tell you, but I will flip it around. Like if you were a human, how would you identify an e-commerce site?
I mean, just by we talked about boilerplates, we talked about core content, like I would look for something that had a lot of boxes that click through to others and images on top of them and titles and stuff like that. Yeah.
it's
no,
I'm not saying yes or no, but it's like, as you can see, it's not rocket science.
No, that's not really my question though. My question isn't whether Google can figure out a page is an e-commerce category page. My question is, how does it figure out that a query has e-commerce intent?
Well, again, that's kind of the magic, but it's very similar to what we do with images, for example, like when to show the image universal result. Basically, people are clicking on the things on the UI that make us believe that this query deserves images. For example, if they click on the images tab, then they are essentially teaching us that we should have shown images for this query. You can also look at the query itself and train by that.
Right.
Funny cat. And the user didn't like it, and then they added pictures.
And lots of people do that. They do A and then B, right?
There you have a signal. Yeah. Let's stay on topic. Hair products. Initially, that could be a Wikipedia entry or something from WebMD or Healthline, but then enough people start adding buy or Amazon or something that is associated with purchase or the word purchase. Slowly, they teach us that we should show e-com results.
Fascinating. Okay, so you'll look at potentially look at behavior after the query.
This is all hypothetical.
Okay.
Like I'm just giving you ideas, like how you could do it.
Sure. Because I know a lot of SEOs have this speculation that Google uses things like pogo sticking and user behavior on the SERP. And I know that you've said in the past that a lot of that is just very speculative, probably not done that way. But what you just said, it suggests otherwise, right? Like clicking images, for example.
So that at least I've been talking about this for a long time. Like I remember one of my first PopCon talks was about like looking at how to identify how to show more images in the web result. Like that, I don't have a problem with saying, because it does happen and it's very easy to see it in action for new terms, for example. Pogo sticking, that's a completely different beast and something that I'm very tired talking about.
Yeah.
But for this, it's really just common sense.
Yeah, I got it. Okay, cool. Oh, very interesting. All right. So I think we almost got through all the questions, so making good time. The next question, I don't know how comfortable you are answering it, but you didn't mention anything about this, so I'll just go ahead, and obviously I'm editing this. So what is the relationship like between Google and search scrapers like Ahrefs, SEMrush, Moz? that are constantly doing searches and scraping them. And the next question, which is related to that relationship, is how accurate are those scrapers at actually pinpointing, because they sell a lot of data to consumers like SEOs about how pages are ranking. And so I guess those are two related questions, like how accurate do you think they are, and what's the relationship like between Google and them?
Like personally, I don't have anything with them. I probably wouldn't use their service. I would rather find other ways to find the same data. It feels weird because every search engine requests from their users to not scrape, because it's generally a waste of resources that we could spend on other things. And instead, we search engines expose a tool that you can use. And I know for certain that both Bing and Google, I don't know about Yandex, we expose the data as we receive from the serving system, from our logs. So you could use that data for many things that involve your site or the site that you are managing. So you could get that data, but you decide that no, I would rather use a service that I have to pay for that is breaking someone else's request, as in, please don't scrape us. Second, I'm very passionate about robots.txt. We do have robots.txt rule for disallow rule /search. It's completely ignored by the scrapers. Don't like it. It's my problem, personal problem. As for Google, generally we do crack down on scrapers that are overdoing things, that hit the, okay, now at this point you are actually DDoSing us. So how about no? And then with those, we just take care of them with a CAPTCHA, and then eventually they will stop doing it.
Cool. Thanks for that. Let's just say 3 or 4 more questions, not many. The first, super quick. Is there any way to simulate international searches that Google doesn't have a problem with? For example, I could use a VPN to simulate an international search. Do VPNs go against Google's terms of use?
Well, I'm not a lawyer, and I want to say probably not.
Right.
Like VPNs are just fine. The other thing, I'm fairly certain you can already do that. There will be differences because the results are more influenced by location than just the wide region. Like course location, especially in a metro area like Sydney, can be quite important. So VPN probably works much better and gives you the more real results. But if you just need to do some random checks, then it's very likely that the search setting will do the job just fine.
Cool. So next question, very random question. Often I find myself very lazy to write meta descriptions, and one of my reasons is that in a lot of my personal testing, which is very anecdotal, I can see that Google will often just pull the snippet from the page anyway, because especially when the query varies, it'll pull different snippets and often ignore the meta description. And so I have a question for you. Are you able to share any data about how often Google ignores meta descriptions when pulling snippets, and how often it provides its own snippet from the content of the page instead?
I don't remember the exact number for the meta description. I do remember the exact number for the title. Meta description is way more query dependent than the title. In the vast majority of the cases, we actually honor the title, the HTML title. I would assume that that's the opposite with meta description, because the snippet is insanely query dependent. Meta descriptions are great for pages that have little content, because then you can still show a decent snippet that you can use to pull in users.
Right. So if I have an e-commerce store that has category pages that are just lots of images and text, for example, then maybe a meta description is a better idea to put some effort in. But if it's just a bunch of blog articles that are 2,000 words long each, and they could rank for a huge variety of keywords, then probably wouldn't waste your time, right? Yeah. Okay, cool. No, that's great. And then this question's from a mate of mine. I actually, I love it. If people add swear words into their content, could that hurt its ability to rank in Google search?
You can certainly overdo it.
Right.
But a few fucks and shits here and there will not hurt. So in general, we are trying to determine whether we should apply safe search on the page or not. If you are overdoing the F word, for example, then that might completely mislead us and might apply safe search on a page that doesn't actually has anything to do with sexual encounters or whatever.
Yeah.
Just because you were using a word so much that it completely misled us. Otherwise, from prudeness perspective, we don't care.
Yeah, okay, got it. But my sort of speculation when I was chatting with my friend about this is like, I can't imagine for very formalized queries where trust is very important, like health queries, that if people are saying, like swearing in the content, that would help. You get what I'm saying? Like, is there a boundary at some point?
That's an editorial choice. Like basically those people who are writing or editing those pages, it's like they are not using that word in academic writing. There are papers, academic papers that do have those words. I know of one that is just the word fuck repeated all over the page, and it was published somehow. But they are just not using those words because they don't need it.
They're used for inflection to make it funny or comical or whatever. Yeah, got it. Okay, cool. Oh, thanks. All right, that's all my questions.